Okay, so what I'm going to be demonstrating today is how to do some spline modeling. I'm going to be modeling this floor for this hut. This is Hagaret's hut from Harry Potter. And so I'm going to be constructing this. There's a lot of different ways that people build box modeling, edge pulling, strip modeling. There's a lot of different ways. Now, I do a lot of spline modeling, so I want to show you a demonstration of the way that I would approach doing this. It's not a right way, wrong way, just different ways. Okay, so right off the bat, just to make sure we're on the same page, I've got the way I have Max set up. I've got mental ray set in. And in my unit setup, I've got to set for U.S. standard feet with decimal inches. That's just the way I measure because I'm in the United States. And then I got, I'm going to be measuring based on feet. Okay, I'm doing feet because I'm doing a piece of architecture. Okay, so the way I'm going to start out is going to be coming in here, create splines. I'm going to use an N-gon. I'm going to come out here and create an N-gon. Now, N-gons by default, now this is a spline, has 6 sides, and this particular hut in here has, looks like 8 sides, so I'm going to change that to 8 sides. And then, it looks like to me that maybe this hut is maybe, about 24 feet, maybe 24 feet across. So that would be 12-foot radius. Okay, and then I want to go ahead and move it to the origin. We want to create it the origin. And so there is the base, and I'm going ahead and just hide my grid. And so 12 feet radius, 8 sides, and then I'm just going to go ahead and convert this to an editable spline. And then I'm going to use a little utility in here where I'm going to come in here and click the edge. Okay, so I'm going to spline mode here. And there's a button in here called outline. And this is the way it works. When you click on this, and I click and hold down on the button on your mouse, and I move the mouse up, it'll make a copy of it, a perfect copy on the inside. If I move the mouse down, it'll make a perfect copy on the outside. Okay. Another thing is there's a little button here called center. And the way that works is when you click on it, it makes 2 copies and they both go out and in from that center point. Okay. And so sometimes I make things that way. In our particular case, I want them to go in. And I want these to be consistently the same size as they go in. So I'm going to type in my information here. So I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to click in 0.8, which is basically we're making about an 8-inch board. Okay. And then I'm going to click here and 0.05 for my gap in there, which would be about a 1/2 inch gap. So I'm just going to repeat that over and over. So 0.8, pick that one, 0.05. Okay, I think I'll do one more. Okay. So now I've got all of my pieces in there. So the big ones, of course, will be boards, and then the small ones will be the gaps between the boards. Okay. Now, what a lot of people would do is once they've had this, what they would do is now come in here and just right click and convert this to an editable poly. Okay. And you can do that But one of the problems with that is then it creates these as one solid piece going all the way around. And I really want these as individual. So I want this to be a separate piece from that, and this to be a separate piece from that. Okay. So I don't want to just convert it to an editable poly. Another thing I see people do would be, which would be logical, is to do an extrude, but extrude is going to do the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to do a different method. The method I'm going to use is a surfacing method. So basically there's a modifier in Max called surface that allows you to make a surface on any quad or triangle. Now right now these are not quads, but if I come in here to my spline tool, and let's get in here a little bit closer, and I click this button cross section and I click from here to there, it will create me my cross section splines all the way around that. You right click to stop. Okay. So it's click, click, right click to stop, click, click, right click to stop, because I don't want those in the center. Okay. I only want the planks. So click, click, right click to stop that action, and then you're still in the tool. So you're just stopping it, because otherwise it'll create cross sections across those, and I don't want it because I want those to be left gaps. Okay, I can't really use a cross section in here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go create line. Okay, and I need to make sure I go up here on my snaps and right click and make sure my snaps are on vertex. And then I want to create these as quads. So I'm going to click from here to there for that one, and from here to there for that one. And now these are quads. Now they're kind of quads and they're not quads because there's no vertex right here. So what we have to do is under vertex, there's a tool called cross insert. And if I click on that, it puts a vertex on both sides of these. And so now those will all be quads. So now I can come in and I put this modifier on it. So it's called surface. Okay. And I'm going to default this out, because by default, when you put it on, you'll probably get something like this. Okay. Now what's happening here is the threshold is set up really high, and what's happening is it's welding these. It's a weld threshold. So normally you're going to want this down to 0 or maybe 0.01. And then that's going to give you a threshold. See, if I have this at 0, I'm not getting that one in there. But if I do 0.01, then my threshold is enough that it's welding all those vertices as we're making our geometry. And since everything is either 4-sided or 3-sided, it's going to give me a shape. Now I want them 4-sided. Because if I want to do subdivisions later, then, I have quads. Now in the end, I'm not going to do subdivisions, but, it gives me the opportunity for that. Okay. Now another option and a problem with this is actually a utility that it was made for creating patches. Okay. So if we were to right click in here and go ahead and create and convert this to a poly right now, it's subdividing this like it would be for a patch. Okay, so that's because the patch topology right here where this says steps is set to 5. What you want to do is zero this out. Then what it's going to do is give us one poly for every quad that we have in there, which is what we want. Now, before we do that, though, I want to actually come in here and I'm going to grab this outside spline and I'm going to want a copy of this. And the reason I want to copy is because I want to create a little piece that I can fit in the holes in between here. So I'm just making a copy of that. And I want it to be a separate object, so I'm just going to attach that. So now with the surface, I can come in here, and now I can go ahead and convert this to an editable poly. And there I have my surfaces, okay? Now the reality is I don't really need this geometry that's in here, okay? So I can take this, control backspace, okay? That'll give me a problem in there, okay? So I just want to go backspace, then this one, we go backspace, and now I don't need that because I'm not going to use subdivision surfaces, and that was just excess geometry. I had to have it quads when I was making the piece because of the way I was doing it, but I just ripped those out because I don't need those. And I'm always thinking about what's the least amount of geometry I can use to make what I want. I see, that's one of the problems with subdivisions. A lot of people have subdivisionitis. I call it subdivisionitis. That's where, subdivision. Sometimes we need subdivisions, sometimes we don't. In this particular situation, I don't need any subdivisions in here. So I don't want them because it just adds extra geometry. All right, I need to give this some depth. So I'm going to come in here and grab all the borders. And then holding my shift key down and grabbing the Z axis, just pull it down a little bit, and that'll give me my edges in there. Okay. Now on this piece that's down here, okay, I just want to go ahead and I can just use an extrude on that one, and that'll give me a solid piece, and that way I'll have something that will show up in these gaps in here. Okay. All right, so I'll just go ahead and convert that to an editable poly. Now I want to go in here and let's put some shaders in here. Okay, so by default, I use a standard shader most of the time on things. I'm going to put a standard shader on here, maybe give it a little bit of specular to it, just a little bit. I don't use standard shaders anymore for anything other than just construction. I don't use them to render with because they're not physically based. They're not accurate. I'll use Arch and Design because that's a physically based shader for when I'm actually doing the texturing. But for tests and stuff, I like the standard. It's lightweight. It's kind of what I call a stupid shader. It doesn't understand reflections and stuff. So it's an easy shader to start with. Okay. And so there is the basis to my floor. Now I would modify this some before I called it finished and started texturing it. I don't need the bottom of this piece. Okay. So I can go ahead and get rid of that. Okay. And now I'm going to pick this one and let's isolate this. Okay. Now in this particular piece, one of the things that you want to make sure is that your normals are not flipped, because a lot of times when we are building things with splines, we can have flipped normals. Okay. And this doesn't have any flipped normals, so it's okay. All you have to do is hit flip. So if they're looking dark and bright on the inside, then the normals are just flipped. So I just need to flip that to make sure they're facing the right way. Okay. Because when you're building splines, it doesn't really know which way you want the objects to face. And so there is a very good way to build that pretty quick. I've gotten me individual pieces, so later I can come back and pick these to map them or something individually. Now, I see people all the time go, well, I want a manufactured edge in here. So a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean a manufactured edge? Well, anytime that something is made, it's not razor digital sharp like this. We want either chamfered or a filleted edge. And that's a lot of people, the reason you're using subdivision surfaces is to give you that. By the way, subdivision to give you that in a lot of ways is just, you know, that's a very wasteful way to do it because it gives you a lot of things you don't need. In this particular case, I'm not going to worry about this because I already know I'm going to be rendering in Mental Ray, and in Mental Ray, they have a rounded point shader. And so what that means is eventually when I get to my actual shader, let's go ahead and assign this so we can see. If you go into the properties of this shader, if you go down here into special effects, down here where it says rounded corners, and you turn that on, it's going to round the corners based on in rendering, not actual geometry. So for small little things like chamfered edges, it's perfect for that. Defaults to 1/4 of an inch. Sometimes that may be a little bit too big for what you're wanting. You can adjust that. Let's go ahead and set up a render so we can see that. Now, when I'm setting up my rendering, by default, max goes to 640 by 480. This is this god-awful 1980s 3:4 format. I really hate that. So I'm going to switch it to HD TV, and I don't need to render that big. I'll go to 1280 by 720. And then I can see that in my viewport. If I hit Shift F, then you can look through your viewport. And so let's just get a little bit closer to this, and let's just do a little test render. And we'll see what this looks like. Okay, and there you can see it's giving us this rounded edge. See that nice rounded edge with a nice highlight, some nice manufactured edge, and it's doing it in the rendering. Okay, so I'll show it to you before and after if I turn that off. And let's just go ahead and clone this render. There's with it. And now we'll render again. And you'll see I don't get those highlights on there. This is the actual geometry, but I'm getting this nice manufactured edge on this by just with the shader. Okay. And I can adjust how much I rounded. Now, this is just a trick. So if we need something very, very rounded where we're going to get close in on it, then yes, we're going to want to subdivide it to get that edge, or built it with a fillet or a chamfer in it to get that kind of a look. But for what we're doing, I'm going to be able to do it all with shaders because we're not going to be that close to it, and it'll work fine with shaders. And so it's rendering faster because I don't have all that geometry in there. Now you'll see some kind of breaking up on this. That's because I've got the render settings at really low, and I don't really care that they're low right now because, you know, these are just test renders. And so that's how I would go about building this, okay? It gives me a lot of options, individual pieces to texture these individually, and I'm not building it all as one thing. So I build the walls separate, I build everything separate because that's the way things are constructed that I have more control over. Okay, that's so far on the actual building of it. Now I'm going to follow this up with actually doing a tutorial on the actual surfacing of that. Okay, thank you very much.